Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Simchat Torah, which is the last day of Sukkot. These make up the holiday cycle during the month of Tishrei, and these are very widely well-known and highly celebrated Jewish holidays. But as with everything in the wisdom of Kabbalah that we look through the lens of in such shows as this one, Kabbalah Explained Simply, I'm Markos, by the way. So we see that there is much more than meets the eye to these holidays and to Jewish holidays in general. And we're going to look deeper into these holidays to see a process taking place within all of them. A process which isn't just relevant to an isolated group of people in the world as we might commonly think of these holidays and Jewish holidays. The wisdom of Kabbalah states that Jewish holidays are not simply celebrations and festivals that are relevant to one group and not relevant to the future further development of humanity, and which are not relevant really to each and every person who lives in the world right now, because Kabbalah describes these holidays and Jewish holidays in general as omnipresent levels in nature which we have experienced before we have consciousness of that experience, meaning in the creation of our being, in the creation of our desire, and the creation of everything that exists today. There were certain levels that everything was created through, and these levels are what we attain when we undergo a certain process of self-examination, self-judgment, decisions, discernments, and an inner process of advancement, all kinds of inner actions, work with intentions, etc., which makes up the whole method of Kabbalah, and which makes up a process that every person will experience on their flesh, if not already now, through access to such wisdom as this, then later when everyone will undergo these things at a certain period of time. Meaning that Jewish holidays, as we said, they're omnipresent levels in nature. They're levels that exist outside of our current level of consciousness of reality. But if we make certain steps towards unraveling that consciousness, similar to peeling an onion away, then we see these levels existing. In other words, we could say that these holidays, all Jewish holidays in general, they're levels of attainment of equivalence of form with nature, that we are originally created in a form which is opposite to nature, meaning all human beings, human nature is fundamentally egoistic. It's a will to receive pleasure for personal benefit alone. And by attaining equivalence of form with nature, so we attain the opposite of that. We attain the force of nature itself, an altruistic force, which is all bestowing, all loving. We learn and feel how that force created everything, feels everything, and it's just up to us to move away all these filters that are blocking us from perceiving that. And that's what we do in the wisdom of Kabbalah, and that's what we're going to look at today. We're going to look through that lens at this holiday cycle. We're going to see it as a process of inner discernments, decisions, and inner actions that are performed by a person on their spiritual journey from this world into the attainment of what is known as the upper spiritual world, that world of, you could say, perceiving nature in its rawest form, perceiving that nature as a force of love and bestowal, which is outside of our perception in our egoistic vessels. So we're already getting deep into it, so we might as well go into the opener and then get into learning about Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, and Simchat Torah, the last day of Sukkot, the Tishrei Holiday Cycle, through the lens of the wisdom of Kabbalah. We'll get into all that right after this. All right, so as you can see here, we have the Tishrei Holiday Cycle lined up. You see there before Rosh Hashanah, there is one that is called Selichot. You could say that that's a preparation for the Tishrei month. It's still in the month of the Jewish month of Elul. Selichot literally means forgiveness. And we'll see what that means. Just as with many things in this wisdom, the preparation is just as important as the action itself and what goes on afterwards. So let's start just looking at this process in general. As we said, there's lots that you can talk about in relation to these holidays and to Jewish holidays in general. You can look at it from the perspective of an individual and their spiritual progress from this world to the spiritual worlds, which is what we're going to look at it as today. You could also look at it from more social perspectives, more global perspectives. You could look at it from the perspective of the Jewish people, as we know the Jewish people in the world today. And there's these multifaceted. You could also look at it from the perspective of the descent of the spiritual roots into their branches from the causal level of where everything was created from to the level of this world. But we're mainly going to focus on our individual progress from here to the spiritual world and looking at these processes, looking at these holidays through that lens. So that's just to situate ourselves a little bit, because as I said, it's a lot to get through in just 1 hour, all these holidays and what you can say about them. So we're going to look at it from that perspective. And let's just get into it. We'll just go through a brief overview of this whole process right now, starting from Selichot, which literally translates to forgiveness. So during the period of Selichot, as I said, we're now talking about a person who has awoken to spirituality, a person who has a point in the heart. They received an initial desire, you could say a prerequisite desire, to search beyond everything that presents itself in this world, meaning that a person who has a point in the heart, a person who has this tiny spark of a spiritual desire, is a person who, you could call them a spiritual seeker. They feel that they belong outside of all kinds of frameworks that already exist in this world, and they seek something beyond that. They seek something unknown. Ultimately, it's a person who seeks meaning in life, a person not just looking for meaning in corporeal goals that are tangible, for example, finding meaning in making more money, finding meaning in finding a great profession for themselves, becoming a great artist, becoming famous, becoming powerful in society, but rather all these corporeal goals for food, sex, family, money, honor, control, and knowledge. They rather seek something beyond them, something which they cannot even understand, perceive, put their finger on what it is. But there's something beyond all that which draws them. And usually it's these people who are drawn to such teachings as this, the wisdom of Kabbalah. This point in the heart, it's also called a desire for spirituality, is what brings a person to undergo the spiritual journey. And when that person plants that, you could say, this seed for spirituality, a point in the heart is not a full spiritual desire. It's like a seed, a tiny point of a spiritual desire, something which is rooted in the spiritual worlds. The spiritual worlds are worlds that have got this full perception of love and bestowal and a positive connection of all its parts flowing through them. It's nature's form, which is completely unfettered by our egoistic perception, which filters it down to only what is the most self-serving information at any given moment. That's how we perceive at any given moment, that we want to receive pleasure, receive enjoyment, fulfillment, feel happy, feel good, for our own personal benefit. That's generally how we want to feel ourselves and our reality around us. So when we start perceiving that there can be much more to life than perceiving and feeling life merely in our egoism, we start getting a desire to move outside of that. And we make certain efforts to do that. We arrange our environment, our society, our social environment. That's called planting that seed of spirituality, planting that point in the heart in a society. You could call that society a Kabbalistic group. You could call it a group of like-minded spiritual seekers who wish to support and encourage each other, people who share that similar desire for something spiritual and who start forming some kind of agreement, some kind of vision of the method of Kabbalah, how it works, how it starts working on a person to bring them from this world into the spiritual world. And they form themselves as a group, these fellow people who share this common point in the heart, this common desire for spirituality. And these people, as we said, support each other, encourage each other, bring each other importance of this method, of the spiritual goal, etc., to exit the egoism, to exit this ego, which is the desire to enjoy for self-benefit alone, or you could say the desire to enjoy at the expense of others and nature. In the wisdom of Kabbalah, or in the Torah, you can say it's written that I have created the evil inclination, meaning the creator, the upper force of nature, created this evil part in reality, an evil inclination, which is called the desire to enjoy at the expense of others, at the expense of nature. Evil because it never allows for complete fulfillment. It always draws any fulfillment that there is around it into itself, into some small space within itself, which dissipates, which fades away, which can never hold any kind of pleasure, joy, happiness in reality, but rather which kills everything. Killing, not the way we understand killing, but killing as in we have a desire. We want that desire fulfilled for our personal benefit alone, meaning we want that desire fulfilled egoistically. It draws the fulfillment into itself, and that fulfillment fades away like sand going through our hands. That's what it means, that this desire is evil. This egoistic inclination within ourselves is something. Again, we might understand this word evil in all kinds of ways from movies and how we're raised, but ultimately that's what it's talking about, that we simply cannot sustain pleasures and a full feeling of life, what is truly called life, which is when we can rise above that desire and equalize it in form with nature itself, when we can equalize it with the loving, giving, bestowing force of nature, which leads us to the perception of an eternal, perfect, harmonious, peaceful existence. So we're detached from that, and that's our whole world, our whole reality. We are used to it in this way, but the reason we die at the end of whatever life we know, the reason we don't know what happens after that, etc., the reason why we can't hold on to any pleasures, the reason why the more we develop, the harder it is to feel and sustain pleasures. We create more and more sophisticated ways of fulfilling ourselves, and we find ourselves entering into more and more situations like depression, anxiety, these mental illnesses, etc., rising higher and higher and higher the more sophisticated we get in trying to fulfill ourselves. And that's the essence of our egoistic desire, trying to make its way in this world, trying to feel pleasure, and that it feels some kind of, at a certain point, we feel a discernment that, no, there's something wrong with this egoistic desire. There's got to be some way we can rise above it, so some way we can work with it. So the period of Selichot is already a person who's on the path, who feels that, who feels some kind of dead end to this egoistic approach to life. A person who already has the point in the heart and is working now to develop themselves spiritually and trying to immerse themselves in these qualities of love and bestowal and positive connection that they learn about through such texts as the wisdom of Kabbalah. So they try to draw those forces from that reality, which is called drawing the surrounding light. We undergo such processes in our studies, meaning that the whole purpose of studying Kabbalah lessons, Kabbalistic texts, is to draw this force from nature, the higher upper force in nature, which is called surrounding light, or makif, it's called in Hebrew. We draw that to ourselves, and it gives us a feeling that on one hand, the importance of attaining the true higher quality of love and bestowal in reality. It gives us that feeling together with a feeling of our egoism. It shines light, so we start actually seeing our ego not as something that is us, but as something that is not us. Meaning that up until we come to such a point where we develop a point in the heart and we start working on the point in the heart to draw forces upon it, to shine light in it. There's an allegory about it that Baal HaSulam talks about, where it's like a person who's in a basement. A person who's in a basement, if all the lights are off, they can't see all the dust, all the filth in that basement. But once you shine the light in there, once you turn on the light, so then you start seeing how filthy this place is, how dirty it is, etc., because We, in our egoism, before we have this emergence of the point in the heart, that's what we have, that's what we are, that we are a desire to receive pleasure for our personal benefit. This desire places all kinds of goals before us that we feel are going to please us, are going to benefit us, whether it's small desires for food, sex, family, or bigger desires for money, honor, control, and knowledge. This is the frame of our egoistic corporeal desires. So we try to fulfill ourselves from that corporeal framework of desires. If we don't have this point in the heart, if we don't have this additional desire that is rooted in these spiritual realms of love and bestowal, where we feel that there's got to be something higher than that, so we get along and we're in that basement, but to us it's as if there's light there, and we don't see any filth, and everything's fine and dandy. We're able to get along with all the pleasures in the world and get along with everything. However, if we develop to a certain point and feel that there's got to be more to all of it, so we then start feeling that there's something lacking in just fulfilling ourselves in such a mode all the time, in an egoistic mode, that as much as we can fulfill ourselves from desires such as food, sex, family, money, honor, control, and knowledge, we always feel that there's something lacking there. We always feel that we cannot sustain any fulfillments there. We feel that even placing certain goals before ourselves within that framework won't give us anything lasting and meaningful to really, truly live for. And that's when we have that feeling of something unknown, something outside that attracts us, which we still don't really know what it is, and it pushes us to search spiritually. It's what brings us to what's called being spiritual seekers. And if we come to the wisdom of Kabbalah, engage in that method, work on placing this seed of a spiritual desire within an environment that is nourished regularly, with the right soil, with the right amount of water, with the right amount of sunlight, meaning that we place ourselves in these conditions, which are called the three means for attaining spirituality, which are the group, the books, and the teacher. That's what Kabbalists define as three means. Kabbalist Judah Ashlag, Bala Sulam, mentions these in a very significant article he wrote called The Freedom. We'll put the link to that below. So he talks about these three means as being those where you place that point in the heart in, and if you work with these three means similar to a seed within its fertile conditions, then it can grow and bear fruit. So just like we wish, if we have a spiritual desire, we wish to grow in a direction of the spiritual goal, which is attaining a true perception and sensation of reality, which, as is defined by the wisdom of Kabbalah, it's attaining equivalence of form, which with nature's source, force of love, bestowal, and connection, that if we attain equivalence of form with that, then we will come to a full, complete perception and sensation of reality. We will feel an eternal sensation in our own vessels. We will attain simply a higher perception to the one that we currently have in our egoistic five senses. We'll attain an additional sense through which we can actually perceive what's happening at deeper and higher levels of nature. So when we undergo that process, we eventually, at a certain point within that process, we come to this preparation period for this holiday cycle we're talking about. It's called Selichot. It's the end of the month of Elul in the Jewish calendar. And that's the discernment, which is considered a dead end for our egoism. We really feel that our ego cannot lead us to any kind of good, sustainable, lasting place. And that leads us to Rosh Hashanah. What's Rosh Hashanah? Literally, Rosh Hashanah is the new year, the head of the year, it translates to. Rosh is beginning or head of the year. Hashanah means the year. And in our spiritual discernments that we're talking about now, that is a decision to change. So it's a decision to change from being this egoistic material that we were born into and that we have developed through, and which our egoism has grown coarser over our whole human development of humanity, but also in our lives individually. we've become just greater and greater egoists, and we see that this egoism, as complicated as it gets, as sophisticated as it gets, never leads us to any lasting fulfillment. Rather, it leads us just to more and more suffering, and that there has to be, we perceive the dead end to egoism in that it simply cannot sustain us. And together with that, since we have been engaging in what leads the point in the heart, the desire for spirituality, to its fulfillment, which is the attainment of equivalence of form with the force of love, bestowal, and connection, which is the source force of nature, which Kabbalists also call the creator from the words, the creator in Hebrew, boreh, from the words bo'ure, come and see, meaning that the Kabbalists relate to such a force in a very active manner, that it's something that has to be attained, to be perceived. There's several quotes about that Kabbalists speak about, meaning not something that we don't simply believe in an upper force. It's rather something that the upper force is more something we take upon ourselves as a hypothesis, that there's certain people called Kabbalists, meaning people who have received that higher information, that higher wisdom, that higher attainment of reality. We take their words as something, and their method as something that we can apply to ourselves. Their method states that there are three means that we can place ourselves into. If we first have that prerequisite point in the heart and we place that among what's called books, teacher, and group. There's other places where we talk more and we detail those means more. By the way, if you join a KabU, we really get into a very structured method of understanding these things, from A to Z. Here we just go through things very quickly on YouTube, on Facebook, but if you sign up to KabU, and you can get a free 14-day trial there, by the way, so you can take courses and a very structured learning method of going through all these steps to really understand in a very fundamental, detailed way everything that we're talking about now, because I'm throwing a lot of basic concepts and fundamental principles here, and there's a very stepwise course-made atmosphere there at KabU to get you through it. So just moving on, so we go through the period of Selichot, which is recognizing the dead end for our egoistic approach to reality. That leads us to a decision to change from egoism to, which is opposite in form with nature, to altruism, ultimately, which is an equivalence of form with nature. We want to become more like nature. We want to discover something true above what we already discern as falseness. Falseness being the egoistic approach where we try to receive what is sweet for ourselves personally and move away from what is bitter or painful to ourselves personally. That reality of sweet and bitter is the reality within our egoism. However, when we move on to wish to change from egoism to altruism, from oppositeness in form to nature to equivalence of form with nature, so there we wish to... So we discern that sweet and bitter is rather under one category of falseness within our egoism. That egoism is something false because it's not something that lasts, it's something that disappears. Really, we discover that it's something that doesn't really exist, but we'll talk about that later. So, but above that falseness, there's truth, which is equivalence of form with nature, which is an altruistic approach to reality, and that's what we aim to do. That's a decision we make at Rosh Hashanah. Just moving on a little bit, we'll get through it a little bit faster now. Yom Kippur is the next discernment along this holiday cycle, where it's a discernment of, it's usually a solemn day. At least in Israel, everything's shut. You can't go out. It's the one day a year where there's not even cars really driving around on the streets. You have people out riding bikes and things out on the streets because there's just no cars. It's like going back 100 plus years, in the past. So there's a very solemn atmosphere around Yom Kippur, and it's highly revered and exalted, this holiday. In our spiritual progress, from moving from having a point in the heart all the way through to spiritual attainment of the eternal and perfect perception and sensation of reality. So Yom Kippur represents a state where, after we made that decision to change from egoism to altruism, we go through a certain period of discernments, to one where it's a key discernment where we really feel the inability to change from egoism to altruism, from a state of receiving for personal benefit alone to bestowing and loving similar to the Creator, that we simply feel incapable of doing that, and that we can't do that change by ourselves, that we need help from some other force, from some other place. And literally we feel that we need help from that force of nature itself, from what's called the Creator. We need that help from that upper force to come and to perform that change on us, because we discover how our whole matter, everything we are made of, is egoism. Egoism is all that we are. And as much as we place a small point of a desire to love and bestow that we might have among others who share that same point, and as much as we work to absorb materials that guide this point on reaching its goal, on reaching a state of higher equivalence of form with nature, we come to a point where we really feel on our flesh that our matter is egoism. Our whole being, everything that we were born as egoistic material, where we are opposite in form and nature. And as much as we have this point within us that we might be able to activate and illuminate and make some efforts to draw certain lights and certain forces in reality to awaken it, we ultimately feel that we cannot change our nature by ourselves. We cannot fight fire with fire, so to speak. Yom Kippur is this day of a self-examination. It's a state, you could say. Another way of thinking of a day is a state. It's a state of self-examination or self-judgment, where we truly feel that we need help from that force that created us in order to apply that change to ourselves. We cannot do that change on our own. We need help. And that self-judgment, that state is called a prayer. That's why there's, externally we see lots of prayers and people are very solemn, etc. on Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur literally translates to the Day of Atonement, which counts to that solemn state. We see how Kabbalists such as Kabbalist Ashlag, Balaslam, Rabash, they actually talk about 2 discernments on Yom Kippur. They talk about that revelation of our inability to change ourselves by ourselves, the full revelation of our nature as evil and the inability to exit it, and the prayer for help together. Since we see the goal connected to it, then it's also equally as joyous as it is solemn. That could be something hard for people who only approach this holiday according to its customs might understand, but there's a certain immense joy that exists within Yom Kippur because of the understanding of the goal that such a state leads us to, that it's any state where it's considered that the wicked or the evil are revealed in a person. They're revealed because that revelation grows our spiritual desire. It grows our desire to want to exit ourselves, to want to exit this egoism, and to want to enter this altruistic reality which is full of those forces of love and bestowal flowing in the connections between us, in the connections between all parts of reality, to a state which is whole and perfect. And so the revelation of our oppositeness to that, where we actually feel and perceive our oppositeness to that and see that we cannot change ourselves by ourselves, that we need help from the upper force to perform that change on us, it's a very joyous state, because through this we actually do come to another step closer to that state itself. And the next state that we are led to is called Sukkot, which is the activation of that altruism over egoism. It's the activation made by the upper force together with our request for it, to allow us a certain level, it's not a complete level yet, but a certain level of being able to be in contact with the loving, bestowing force of nature upon our egoism, upon wishing to solely receive for our benefit alone, and having that connection established there, meaning that it's activated. We're able to. It's literally a spiritual state. All of these are spiritual to a certain extent, but that is one where we are in a certain level of equivalence of form with nature. And that's why we speak about this Tishrei Holiday Cycle as a certain cycle, as a certain series of processes and of inner discernments, decisions, judgments, examinations, introspections, which lead to this activation, a certain inner action that takes place, where we shift from being solely immersed in our egoism, gaining a point in the heart which starts scrutinizing the things, working with a certain method and placing ourselves in environmental conditions which shines a certain light to ourselves, a certain force to ourselves, which starts making us go through these processes at a more accelerated rate. And then eventually it leads to that, through all these things, from feeling the dead end of egoism, through a decision to change ourselves from egoism to altruism, to an inability to change ourselves by ourselves, all the way through to that help which comes from above and activates the ability to be equivalent in form with nature to a certain extent over our egoistic form, which is opposite to nature that we were born with. So that's in a nutshell, even though that nutshell was probably most of our lesson. But that's really what we wanted to talk about today. So if there's 2 takeaways up until now, just before we go on to... Well, okay. So if there's any takeaways until now, it's one, that the Jewish holidays, there's more than meets the eye to them, that the Jewish holidays are not just celebrations and festivals of one people in humanity, but rather it's something that's relevant to anyone, especially anyone who has a point in the heart, but really it's relevant to everyone, even though it might be more concealed for the time being. They are omnipresent levels in nature that we attain, levels of equivalence of form with nature, that when we attain them, like peeling away an onion, we move towards them and we experience those states. And we can experience these inner states of Selichot, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Simchat Torah. We can experience these in January and February and March. We don't need to experience them solely at the time when they come down to our world in a branch level of orders. There's certain things with the calendar. As I said, there's many things here that we don't have time to get into. But ultimately, we're talking about an inner process that takes place. And we just went through a few key points of that inner process, which is represented by the Tishrei Holiday Cycle. So with the time remaining, we'll try to get through a bit more in relation to each holiday. So, and look at some excerpts as well. So starting with Rosh Hashanah. What you see here is a bit of a scary diagram, but don't be too scared by it. I just want to try to illustrate some things in relation to, even though we've been talking about all these holidays as our processes from what's called below upward, from being this egoistic material that was born in this world and coming to have this recognition of our egoism as something that's holding us back and wishing to change ourselves and to move up towards spirituality. And, we develop this desire for spirituality and we go on a spiritual journey, etc., meaning that we're moving from our lives as we know it to the future, to a future final state, which is in equivalence of form with nature, which is considered the purpose of creation. It's also the purpose of Kabbalah studies, etc. So that's how we've been looking at it up until now. I just want to say that there's various aspects we can look at these things. I just want to give give some aspect of it, that Rosh Hashanah, its root, when you're talking about the stemming down of all the spiritual structures, the spiritual worlds, Partsufim and Sfirot, from the first initial point where a desire to receive was created by the desire to bestow of nature of the creator. And then it went through all kinds of interplays of receiving and giving from that point, which ultimately led to a shattering of the vessels, which led to the reality, the perception and sensation of reality that we have today. So Rosh Hashanah represents a certain point in that concatenation down of all these states and processes, which is really the birth of Adam HaRishon. It's called the birth of man in the Bible. There's been other Kabbalah Explained Simply where we've talked about this, so you can go back and look at those. If you look up, for example, Adam and Eve, there's been a couple that we've done recently, the 7 days of creation, some Torah stories around that. So there we talk a lot more about this creation of Adam HaRishon. Adam HaRishon literally means the first man. It's what the wisdom of Kabbalah gives the name to as being the common soul of all of humanity, meaning the common soul, meaning that all of humanity, which is in its soul-like state where we all experience the full force of love and bestowal and connection, a positive connection between all parts of, you could say, of humanity, but it's really between all parts of our soul. We feel an eternal and perfect sensation of reality as that one soul. We feel ourselves oppositely to the way we do today. Now we feel ourselves as if we're, each one is this important being that can receive from all kinds of external sources that we perceive to ourselves into ourselves, and that we try to enjoy ourselves egoistically for our personal benefit. In the soul of Adam HaRishon, we each feel ourselves as rather being similar to how cells and organs feel themselves in a human body, but on a much more conscious level, meaning that we feel ourselves as parts of a much, much, much greater whole, and that we wish to benefit, to serve, to be the most beneficial possible parts of that whole that we could possibly be. And the feeling of the whole and being parts of that whole gives us this whole new feeling of vitality and life. That's what gives us the sensation of an eternal and perfect life, because we all feel parts. We literally identify ourselves not as this egoistic, separated self as we feel today, but as that self of Adam HaRishon, as that one soul. We all feel the life of this full soul that we are parts of, this full, you could say, just for lack of better ways of trying to understand it, this full organism that we're a parts of, and that we're all immersed in that force of love and bestowal that comes from above, and are able to give it back to all the parts of that soul as one whole. So Rosh Hashanah is literally the creation of that soul. That's what the root of this holiday, that's where the root of this holiday is, in the concatenation down of reality from the initial state where we were created as a desire to receive, from a desire to bestow of the creator of nature, through to our reality. From that point of Adam HaRishon onwards, there were certain processes like the breaking, the sin of the tree of knowledge, as it's known, and further other shatterings into 600,000 souls into the points in this world. And this world is where we are. It's outside of this whole spiritual structure up here, all these things taking place. It's not the purpose of our lesson now to get into detail in these things. Just understand that the whole wisdom of Kabbalah, meaning when you're reading the wisdom of Kabbalah in the language of Kabbalah, it's actually talking about all these things taking place up here in the concatenation from above downwards of reality, as it was revealed by Kabbalists who attained that spiritual reality from below upwards. That's why we say that these Jewish holidays are omnipresent levels of nature. You see that there are certain levels here that just pre-exist us and which constantly exist. And if we shift from this world into the spiritual world, we simply reveal all these levels in spirituality that are pre-existing, that were there before, and we only need to adapt our perception and sensation to these levels that exist, and then we start revealing everything that's up here. And certain revelations have certain connotations, which we call holidays, that we celebrate for certain reasons, very joyous occasions or very solemn occasions when we such as the case of Yom Kippur, etc., etc. But in any case, there's certain discernments, decisions, inner actions that take place, which lead us into the full perception and sensation of this whole spiritual structure and all these processes taking place up here. Yeah, so just the word for Adam is human, which means similar. So when we're attaining that state of Rosh Hashanah or attaining higher states, a state of Adam HaRishon simply means a certain state of similarity or equivalence of form with nature, with the creator. This is just further explaining what I just mentioned before, that in our initial state, in the above downward state where we were created as that one soul, we were unconsciously adhered among each other and with the creator before that shattering took place. And our whole separation from nature, because you might be asking, why would we separate? Why would we detach from nature? Why would we detach from that force of bestowal if we were once in that full, perfect eternity and perfection? If we had that it's all in order to regain that consciousness and as if attain it from our own free will, and to come back to that same structure that exists there, that we were created in, but consciously, to have it within our consciousness by feeling the opposite of it. And this birth of the altruistic desire, that's the birth of the point in the heart, as we were talking about. And we're talking about the processes and these holidays merely from this point onwards. Why do we speak about it mainly from this point onwards, as if only doing that today in this lesson? It's because it's the most practical for us to be able to see a few steps that lay before us, and to be able to see how through applying such a method upon ourselves, we'll be able to move on those steps and move closer to it. So yeah, we have that state of Rosh Hashanah from above downward, which is Adam HaRishon, and we're talking also about the state of Rosh Hashanah from below upward, where, as we said, we feel that all this prior egoistic development is leading to a dead end. We get this emergence of a point in the heart, and we feel that we need to make a change in our lives to become like this quality. It's called the altruistic quality, the quality of love and bestowal, which is sourced in nature, to become and attain a true state of existence above all this falseness down here. So that decision to change is considered Rosh Hashanah at this level. And as we said, year, Shana, stems from the word for Shinui. They share the same linguistic root in Hebrew. So that's where the whole decision to change comes to. So yeah, Rosh Hashanah simply means the beginning or the head of change. And that becomes very clear when we're looking at it as a inner process of spiritual development. Just a couple of excerpts about it. We ask of the Creator and mark a sign on Rosh Hashanah, saying, "May we be the head and not the tail." Yeah, you even see in the customs, there's a custom of having a fish head on the table where you're eating the Rosh Hashanah feast. So that's where this comes from, that you wish to be as the head and not the tail, meaning that is, may the Israel in us be the head and may the wicked be the tail, to have our egoistic desires at the tail. And Israel also, it stems from the word straight to God, Yashar Kel, a pure intention of love and bestowal. So again, even Kabbalist Rabash writes in Matan Torah, the giving of the Torah, about how only an insane person would think that Israel is talking about something nationalistically when we're discussing spiritual matters. So Israel talks about the intention to love and bestow, the direction straight to, as it says, straight to God, a pure direction to the goal of creation, which is a state where we are in that state of love and bestowal, the altruistic state. So let that be the head, let the intention to bestow be at the head, and let the egoism be the tail, which is also important. I mean, it also shows that we don't suppress, we don't suppress or repress our egoism. We don't try to, as if, kill our egoism, as if it doesn't exist. We understand rather that it's a part of us, it's what we're made of, and we simply rise above it, meaning it exists there. It's also a fundamental difference between the wisdom of Kabbalah and other teachings, that we learn how to hold two opposites in the same place, to hold egoism there with everything that it entails, and to develop the importance of the higher reality above it, where we move in a direction of love and bestowal above and outside the egoism. So may Israel in us be the head, and may the wicked be the tail, and then we will be rewarded with long life and the goodness in the intention of creation, which is to do good to his creations. And so in short, we'll attain that eternal and perfect state of existence, which comes from entering into equivalence of form with nature's force of love and bestowal. Just another one here. The meaning of Rosh Hashanah. This is by Rabash, an excerpt. The meaning of Rosh Hashanah is a new beginning, when a person begins to build a new structure. Yeah, so that's the decision to change, where you want to develop a new structure of yourself. It is, as our sages said, one should always consider oneself half sinful, half righteous. Yeah, again, putting the egoism or the wicked below, half sinful, putting the direction to love and bestowal above, half righteous. If he performs a single mitzvah, a mitzvah is a good deed, a good commandment. It's not how we understand mitzvot in this world. Rather, a mitzvah is literally an action of correcting our egoism to be in a form of altruism, correcting our egoism to be in a form of love and bestowal, meaning undergoing a certain level of change where we become more equivalent in form with nature's force of love and bestowal. So that's considered a mitzvah, spiritually speaking, according to the wisdom of Kabbalah, because especially people coming from a corporeal, you could say, Jewish background, so they understand mitzvot as something completely different. So it's important to make these clarifications of these definitions. So if he performs a single mitzvah, happy is he, for he has sentenced himself and the whole world to the side of merit. If he commits one transgression, woe unto him, for he has sentenced himself and the whole world to the side of fault. That's how a person feels himself when they're on the spiritual path. Even at the very beginning of Bala Sulam's preface to the wisdom of Kabbalah, the Pticha, the first thing he opens with is that man is a small world. We feel ourselves as the center of reality, where everything around us depends on us. That's how a person who's moving forward spiritually starts feeling themselves, because they really feel, again, if we think of ourselves as even just being a cell in a whole body, think about it. The cell really, if it's not performing for the benefit of the whole body and it starts receiving excess for self-benefit alone, that self is cancerous. It brings upon destruction and death to the whole body. Whereas if it's feeling the importance and feeling as if it's connected to the whole body and needs to supply the body with everything that it can supply it, so that's what it does. So it's similar here in these situations. Oh, there's another one. It is said in the Rosh Hashanah prayer, and they shall all become one society. In that state, it will be easier to do your will wholeheartedly. That's also pointing to the fact that Rosh Hashanah, I think there's more excerpts, but I didn't put them in here, right? Yeah, see, we've got to move to Yom Kippur. Just this one itself shows that Rosh Hashanah, you can see the root as it's embedded in Adam HaRishon. There's several excerpts about it being, and they shall all become one society. Rosh Hashanah is considered a holiday which represents our connection to the collective, since it is rooted in the creation of Adam HaRishon, rooted in the creation of that one soul that we are all parts of, that we extend from, and that we will once again attain at a certain point, you could say the final point in our final destination in our existence. So Rosh Hashanah, it says that they shall all become one society. That's, you could say, part of the Rosh Hashanah prayer, that this becomes part of our request, that part of that decision to change connects us to that full feeling of that one soul of Adam HaRishon, that one soul that exists in our root state of existence, as one society. That's what it says, and that is what we'll do. It says to do your will wholeheartedly, to do the Creator's will, to do the will from above, this will that is embedded in creation from the force of nature itself, which is developing creation to higher and higher states of unity up until the full state of unity of ourselves with nature. So that's the will of nature. That's where it's developing us to. And so we can, with our own decision and our own efforts and our own free will, place that goal before ourselves and align our will with, as it says, your will here with a capital Y, meaning the will of nature. We can align our will with the will of nature wholeheartedly. And that's part of that decision we can make at that state of Rosh Hashanah. Yom Kippur. Let's get into a little bit of Yom Kippur. Why are Rosh Hashanah, the beginning of the year, and Yom Kippur regarded as good days, festivals, although they are judgment? Yeah, there's this word for these holidays as being also judgment. Judgment, what's judgment? It relates primarily to the wholeness that appears on those times. There is fear that the outer ones might come into self-reception in mind and heart. Outer ones meaning, we'll keep going through it. This is why we must increase the awakening for repentance. Repentance means returning the desire to receive into being a desire to bestow. By this, we return to adhesion with the upper source and are awarded eternal dvekut, adhesion. And since we're running low on time, we don't have time to really go into lots of this, but the essence of it is that at Yom Kippur, after we make that decision to change at Rosh Hashanah, as we discussed, we go through certain discernments and we reach this state where we undergo serious self-introspection, self-examination. As it says here, judgment. Judgment is synonymous with prayer in the wisdom of Kabbalah. Both words also share the same linguistic root there. Le'apil, to incriminate oneself, meaning to lower oneself and to and to pray, leit palel. So we return, ultimately we come to a point where we wish to return the desire to receive into being a desire to bestow, where we wish to, that becomes the repentance that we ask for, and we ask for help from above. The judgment is that we really feel that we cannot make that change that we decided on, you could say, in a previous state. So with Rosh Hashanah, it's like, here we go. Yeah, we have a nice diagram. With Rosh Hashanah, it's like we make that decision to move forward, and we go in this line here, going up, you could say what's called the right line. Right line is considered everything that's got the greatness of the goal of creation, the greatness of achieving that state of love and bestowal and raising the importance of that state. So that's Rosh Hashanah. It's like a push in that direction. Yom Kippur is when the self-examination, self-judgment comes upon us, meaning that we head into what's called the left line. And you see the necessity of these two lines to create what's called a spiritual vessel. That's also a unique aspect of the wisdom of Kabbalah, that it unites between these two states of raising the greatness of the goal, the importance of attaining adhesion with the Creator, attaining adhesion, equivalence of form with the source force of nature, love, bestowal, connection. That's what we do when we're making that decision at the state of Rosh Hashanah. And then comes upon the state where we undergo a self-examination, where we need to, where we feel that we're incapable of doing that. So that importance of the bestowal also brings upon us, it's not shown here, but it brings upon us a certain illumination of that light from that higher level. That's why the first step is always in this direction. It's always raising the importance of bestowal, the importance of connection, of everything that relates to the qualities of the Creator, of nature. We raise those things. And then you could say as a consequence, we get the discernment through the illumination of the forces from those levels. It brings upon us the discernment that we're incapable of doing that with our own strength, with our own powers. That's the illumination of the left line, self-examination, self-judgment. It's a state of Yom Kippur. We see how we are sinful. We see how we are wicked. For a sin, we sinned against you, against the Creator, with the evil inclination. That's from the Yom Kippur prayer. We should ask, because all the transgressions come from the evil inclination, we should interpret that the sin is in saying that there is an evil inclination instead of there is none else besides him. If a person is unworthy, he is cast out from above. This comes by clothing in the will to receive, called the evil inclination. This is the meaning of, for the inclination of a man's heart is evil from his youth, meaning that the Creator created him this way, since the will to receive is the actual kli, the actual vessel, except it must be correct. This is a Rabash quote. What can we take from this just for now? So we reveal in that state of Yom Kippur, we see that all the sins, all the transgressions come from the fact that we are this evil inclination, come from the fact that we are egoistic material, that we are a will to receive with the intention to receive all benefits for personal pleasure alone. The sin is in saying that there is an evil inclination instead of there is none else besides him. That's an important point. That you could say in the previous state we decided that everything we want to do is just to come close to this one force that exists in reality, and to see that there is a sole, single, one force of nature, of love and bestowal, that is running everything, that is behind everything, that is also behind our own evil inclination, that it created everything in order to, it created a created being and detached it from itself, led it through all kinds of processes, which led to the sin of the tree of knowledge, which led to it wishing to receive benefit for itself, in order to bring it to attain equivalence of form back with itself, back with the force of nature, back with the Creator from its own seeming free will, and to attain what's called 620 times the pleasure that it originally had when it was first created as that soul of Adam HaRishon from above downward. We'll talk about these numbers at another time, what's 620 times more. Literally to attain conscious adhesion of that state from its attainment of it from below upwards. And it has to undergo these feelings of oppositeness and separation in order to attain that full state again. So the sin is saying that it's a very interesting discernment, that there is this ego, that there's this evil inclination, which exists instead of the single one force that is behind it, meaning that at every single moment we can perceive there's this concept of there is none else besides him, there is none else beside a single one force of the creator that exists, that creates everything, that sustains everything at every single moment. And if we say that there's something else that exists besides that, if there's an evil inclination, an ego that exists besides that, that itself is called the sin. Meaning sin is not some action that we do, rather it's a state that we exist in. This is another, you could say, one of these crucial definitions in the wisdom of Kabbalah, which is different to the way we define things in this world. Because sin in this world is understood as some kind of action that I do according to my own will, which is considered, you could say, morally incorrect or something. That's sin according to this world. Sin in the wisdom of Kabbalah, we say that it's a state where we perceive ourselves as being in some kind of material, the evil inclination, the ego, the desire to enjoy for personal benefit alone, the desire to enjoy at the expense of others and nature, that we exist within this, and that we say that it exists in and of itself, something as separate to what's called there is none else besides him, separate to one force that stands behind it, that is guiding it to a perfect state, and that guides it purposefully with everything happening to it, really happening to it for the best possible reasons, that we need to undergo everything and experience everything under that influence in order to develop a desire that will bring us to a full conscious adhesion with that source force of nature, the force of love and bestowal, which will bring upon us that sensation of eternity and perfection manifold times than when the way we felt it originally. So all this self-examination and these prayers and this feeling that we cannot attain that state by itself that we undergo, which is considered the state of Yom Kippur, brings us to Sukkot, which, as we said here, it's the activation of altruism over egoism, meaning Sukkot is already the creator or nature granting us that ability to be in a certain level of equivalence of form with it, and that it gets expressed in the Sukkah, which we'll talk about in a second. The Sukkah is a temporary residence. As it said, we come out of our permanent residence, which is our ego, that was our ego from that point, and we enter a certain temporary residence, which is called a Sukkah. We'll see what the Sukkah is in a second. But let's just read about this concept of exiting the permanent residence of our ego and entering a temporary residence of the Sukkah. So Sukkot is temporary residence. This means that one who has already been awarded permanent residence and has nothing more to do, as with the matter of the first to count the iniquities, the advice is to leave for temporary residence, as when he was on his way to the house of God before he arrived at the permanent residence. At that time, he constantly needed to reach the Creator's palace, and he had guests, when his work was in the form of a passing visitor. And now he can extend from the past work, when he was always thankful and praising the Creator, for the Creator always bringing him closer. And from this he had gladness. Now on Sukkot, he can extend that gladness that he had then. This is the meaning of temporary residence. This is why they said, leave the permanent residence and dwell in temporary residence. There's a lot here. Anyone who wants to get deeper into these excerpts, we actually have lots of lessons about Sukkot that you can find in our archives. We'll put the links in the descriptions to those. But in general, what we're talking about here is as a permanent residence that we were in, and we exit that and we enter a temporary residence. The temporary residence is that state of Sukkot, and it's represented by a Sukkah. In the world, you see this custom here of people making these temporary residences, making these places where they go and eat, feast, have guests. It's called a Sukkah. It actually has a very deep spiritual root, the Sukkah. What's the Sukkah? Just some aspects of it. Firstly, the Sukkah, the main aspect of the Sukkah is the schach, or the thatch. It's made of all kinds of waste materials that are placed at the top as its roof, and it's made in a certain way which lets in just a little bit of light through the roof. So what's this Sukkah, its structure, representative of? It's representative of, as we see here on the right, a spiritual partzuf, a kli, a vessel for the reception of the spiritual light, meaning a spiritual partzuf is literally us, when we enter into a certain relationship, connection with the Creator, with nature at its source levels. And how is this expressed? So the schach, or the thatch, is representative of the masach, or the screen. The screen, or the masach, coupled with the reflected light. The direct light is the or yashar. These are the pleasures that extend directly from the Creator, which are constantly shining upon us. So that's what comes from the Creator, from nature toward us. And then this structure of placing upon ourselves this schach, meaning things that were of lesser importance, we place them upon our heads. Yeah, that's the idea of placing these waste products upon our heads, that they were lesser importance. And then we place them above us. And then we conceal ourselves under that to a certain degree, and we are able to let in a little bit of the light above that we're able to receive in a manner of bestowal. So what happens here is that the screen and the reflected light represent the intention to bestow back to the Creator on our behalf. We want to be in that equivalence of form of love and bestowal back to nature, and that's represented by the screen and the reflected light. And the reflected light is equal to the amount of inner light, meaning the inner light is what enters our spiritual kli, our spiritual partzuf. It enters into us. What is this? It's the amount of pleasure that we're able to receive for the sake of bestowal. So we're able to feel this amount of pleasure because we're able to bestow it back to the Creator. That's what it means, that this is equal to this. And then there's a certain partition here and a certain amount where we're unable to feel the pleasure. And that's where we still cannot receive that pleasure, that enjoyment that comes from nature itself, these forces of love and bestowal that we've attained a certain equivalence in form to. There's still an area that we're unable to receive it fully. And that's why there's this route of allowing just a little bit of light to enter through these things that we place above us in that schach, in that thatch, and that it's not something that lets in a full amount of light or that it's fully closed, etc. So that's the general idea of a structure of a sukkah. Sukkah comes from the word schach, or thatch, which covers the mind, since faith is considered specifically above reason. Well, that opens a whole other topic there, faith above reason. In short, faith, again, it's one of these words that we define differently in the wisdom of Kabbalah. Faith is actually considered an attainment. We talk about faith specifically above reason in the wisdom of Kabbalah. The way we understand faith in this world, meaning belief, is faith below reason, meaning we usually, for example, faith that exists at the level of religions, believing in something without having an attainment of it. That's called faith below reason. And then there's faith above reason, which means that our reason tells us that everything is working in this egoistic manner. Our reason really is representative of our egoism. And going above reason, going in faith above reason, means that we attain that level of reality, that level of equivalence of form with nature above our intellect, above our ability to, above everything that is in our egoistic vessels. So all this is what we attain in that faith above reason, and it's thanks to this tool, which the schach, thatch, represents in the sukkah structure, which really is the screen and the reflected light in action. And then we come to the last holiday, which is the Simchat Torah. It is written in Shara Kavanot that Torah is called Ziranpin, and he bestows upon Malchut. It means that Malchut is already fit to receive the abundance. Therefore, Ziranpin, who is called Torah, is happy. This is called the joy of Torah. Simchat Torah means the joy of Torah. It's the last day of Sukkot. It's when Sukkot we undergo a process of being able to receive and give these lights that come from above in a manner of bestowal in order to bestow to a certain level. And then Simchat Torah is the full revelation of the Malchut. The Malchut means that we reach a full degree. Yom Kippur is a state when we reach a state of Malchut to reach a certain feeling that we need help from above. And also Simchat Torah is a certain state where we reach the Malchut, where we are able to experience the full amount of pleasure that comes from the Torah, from the Creator, or from Ziranpin in this case. Lots of new words in the period where we don't have much time. But again, just want to say that you can find out all about these things, even about these structures and the Sfirot, Ziranpin, Malchut, and their positioning and relationship. There's a blueprint of creation course in KabU where you can learn about them. So, treat all this as something that exists in points of much deeper material that you can study in a much more structured manner in KabU. We can interpret this, the joy of the Torah, we can interpret this according to what Bala Sulam said, that one should be happy, that the Creator is happy, that he can bestow upon the lower ones. Yeah, so that's called the joy of Torah, the Simchat Torah. Torah extends from the word ora'ah, meaning instruction. It also shares a linguistic connection with the word for light, or. So this light at a higher level, if we just show this for a second. So this is a general layout of the 10 Sfirot as they come towards us. We have the Sfirah of Keter, Chokhmah, Bina, Ziranpin, and Malchut. And it said here that Simchat Torah is when there's a certain connection between Malchut and Ziranpin, that there's a certain illumination in both. It's often said that Ziranpin is as the creator toward Malchut, which is as the created being. So Malchut is the place of full reception, in these 10 Sfirot. And its connection to Ziranpin is what's established at Simchat Torah, meaning that we attain a certain level of equivalence of form with our higher Sfirah, with Ziranpin, which is as the Creator towards us, or our higher level of nature, that higher level of love and bestowal towards us, and we attain a certain level of equivalence between them, and that's the essence of Simchat Torah, without getting too deep into it. So that's it for now. As we keep saying, or as I keep saying, KabU is the place if you want more on these things. As we said, the main thing, I understand we touched and dabbled in a few excerpts which opened the whole lesson in of themselves if you want to go there. So if you are interested in getting deeper into all this material, KabU is definitely the place to get into it. There's structured courses there which guide you through all the basic concepts and fundamental principles of the wisdom of Kabbalah. There's ways to join study groups and groups where you can really exercise this method in practice. It's all there at KabU. Definitely check it out. The links are in the chat, in the description. I'm Markos. This has been Kabbalah Explained Simply. I've been very happy to overview the Jewish holidays of Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, and Simchat Torah with you today, looking at them from a spiritual perspective, and look forward to seeing you again. See you later.